How do grandmasters learn and memorize hundreds of chess openings easily? In fact, this is probably one of the most common problems that you guys share in comments. You tell me, Igor, all these openings that you share are great, but I forget them right after watching the video, so let's fix this together. We're going to use the French defense as an example, but the same logic will apply to any other chess opening that you wish to learn. So why do we play the French defense? Well, there are a couple reasons. And let me highlight the word why here. In order to learn openings effortlessly, you should try to understand, truly understand the reason behind every move that you play. Then you won't have to memorize it. You will just naturally understand it. So what do we want with the French defense? First off, of course, we fight for the center. We challenge this pawn. Secondly, as usual, we move central pawn so that we give some space for our other pieces to be developed later. And finally, we also barricade this diagonal so that in the opening, there will be no attack right here, no right lever attacks and whatnot, and your king can be very safe. That's why the French defense is a very solid chess opening that secures you from any early attacks. Now, what will your opponent do? Well, should we worry about this trade? Well, not really. It will only unblock this bishop and make a very symmetric and equal position. After this, it's very easy for us to just develop our pieces. Therefore, the main move here is considered knight to c3, where white guards this pawn and also puts some pressure to your pawn on d5. Now, what should you do next? Should you trade here? Well, there is a general rule which states that to take is a mistake. Usually when you force an unprovoked exchange, you only help your opponent, such as in this case. Trading on e4 would only help white to move his knight to a better, more central square. Therefore, we do not want that. And instead, goes knight f6, adding more pressure to this pawn. Now, as we know, trading on d5 is not a problem. It's going to only unblock the bishop, right? So we don't worry about that. How about pawn to e5? What do you do next? Well, normally in chess, you wish to go forward and towards the center. But in this case, the problem with the move knight to e4 is that after the trade, this pawn on e4 is isolated and your opponent can attack it in the long run and probably win. That is why we do not want that, and that is why we play a more modest move knight to d7. Now here, white usually wishes to solidify the central pawn chain and goes pawn f4, which brings us to the first key aspect of this learning system. You gotta ask yourself, what is my plan? If you understand the plan, you're not going to worry even if your opponent plays the other move or you forget the specific sequence of moves, because you're going to stick to the plan and you'll play decent moves anyway. So what is your plan right here? Well, we can see that white has expanded and gained some space advantage. That is a good thing for white. But that also comes at the cost of expanding the position a little too much for white, meaning these pawns are now close to your position and it's easy for you to attack them, while white does not have sufficient development. Therefore, you can actually challenge these central pawns, and that is your plan. Now, from these two central pawns, which one are we going to attack? Well, it's pretty easy to notice that the pawn on e5 is very well defended. It's very hard to attack it anyhow. Therefore, we instead are going to attack this pawn, which is not defended by any other pawns. Therefore, both pawns and pieces of yourself can attack it, and therefore we play pawn c5 challenging this pawn. Alright, now should white take right here? Well, once again, to take is a mistake. The very same general rule. If white takes right here, it only helps you to put your bishop to an open diagonal. In the long run, it will be harder for white to castle kingside. Therefore, it's good for you, and white should not do that. Instead, white probably should defend this pawn by going knight to f3, and you do the same, knight c6, just put more pressure. Now here, let's say they go bishop to b5, which is very common on amateur level, even though it is an incorrect move in general. And this brings us to the second point of the system, the second question that you gotta answer for yourself. What are the best squares for my pieces? AKA, how should I develop, right? Now, our knights are already developed. How about this bishop? Well, we know that if white is naive enough to trade right there, our bishop is going to be developed to this active diagonal. If not, there is not much choice really, but we're going to play bishop e7 and castle kingside. As for the light square bishop, it is really that bad bishop. It is restricted by this light square pawn chain in the middle of the board, and therefore it is one of your biggest problems, how to find a good square for this piece. Of course, moving it to d7 in the future is pretty natural if you can get this knight out of the way, and in the long run, you'd probably wish to bring it somewhere to this diagonal if possible. That would be the ideal outcome. Now, how about the queen? Since we know that we wish to attack the center and we're already putting quite strong pressure right here, queen to b6 is a very common move for black to play here in the French defense. And right here, queen b6 is justified even more because from here, not only we're going to put more pressure to the central pawn, but we're also pressuring the bishop and maybe indirectly the pawn on b2 if white ever wants to move the bishop out of there. So from now, queen b6 really makes this bishop and the pawn on d4 kind of shaky. And if your opponent will trade right here, that'll be great for you, and that actually brings us to the third question of the system. Favorable exchanges. Very often in a position there are multiple opportunities for exchanges, and if you understand which exchanges are good for you, then it's easy for you to see what to strive for. Now, coming back to this position, we know that generally if white trades on c5, that's good for you because it helps you to bring the bishop out to an active square, and white gets rid of one of his central pawns, which previously was ensuring his base advantage. Now, how about this trade on c6? Generally, trading off white's light squared bishop is a really great thing for you, because normally in the French defense, you're supposed to castle kingside, and if white has the bishop right here on d3, it's going to support his kingside attack very well. Therefore, if you can take away this bishop, it will basically neutralize any potential attacks of white in the middle game, and therefore you're very much welcome white to trade it off. And if white captures on c6, not knowing that this is a favorable exchange for you, for black, then you just thank white and recapture. Now, we also know that we really wish to bring our bishop right here, because we know that this is the best development for the bishop. Therefore, now you can actually recapture this way, also opening up this diagonal. And if white trades right here, then once again, you thank your opponent, you know that this is a favorable exchange for you, you recapture with the bishop. Now it's getting really dangerous for white, just to illustrate if they try to attack you this way. Now, of course, it's not forced, but just to illustrate the point, you can already win the game on the spot by bringing your bishops to these active squares, and white is done. Alright, now we know that bishop to b5 is actually a step in the wrong direction for white, because white didn't know the best squares for his development. And let's play the correct move, bishop e3, developing a bishop and solidifying the center. What should you do here? We're going to apply the exact same set of rules for this position to find the best move. And once again, you see that you don't even have to memorize, you just apply same general logic. Now, do you want to trade on d4? Well, still to take is a mistake, right? It's good to trade if there's a particular follow-up that gives you an advantage. But if there's no follow-up, then it only helps your opponent to advance his pieces, and that's not good for you. Alright, what are the other moves worth considering? Well, that comes back to the question of good squares for your pieces to be developed. Now, we know that you can play bishop e7 and then just castle, so that's one move. Queen b6 is the other common move. As for the other pieces, it's hard to develop them at the moment, therefore the choice is between these two moves, and both of them are good and definitely worth considering. Alright, so let's play bishop e7, for example, and white goes queen d2, just aiming to castle queenside. What do you do here? Well, at this point, queen b6 already makes less sense, because if you play this move, typically you attack in two directions, right? You attack this pawn on b2 and d4, and sometimes it could be unpleasant for white. But in this position, white can simply castle queenside, which he was going to do anyway, and that would protect this pawn, and so your queen b6 was kind of for nothing. So let's take this back. Therefore, after queen to d2, we can probably simply castle, because basically there's no easy way for you to find any other useful move. So let's say you castle, and now white castles queenside as well. Alright, what do you do then? Well, we need to still think about our general plan. Like, what was our plan? Well, initially it was to attack these pawns, mainly this one on d4. However, white reinforced it really, really well, right? White provided as many defenders as he possibly could to reinforce the defense of this square. Therefore, keep attacking these pawns probably unrealistic for us, because white has much more defenders than we have attackers. At the same time, we can see that the position has changed. Now we have opposite side castlings, and there is a very standard plan for those cases, right? It's just a pawn storm against your opponent's king. And so we can play c4, aiming to develop this pawn storm on the queen side and to attack white. And in fact, it's going to come very quickly. So now white has to fight for equality, which sounds like some radical political slogan. Anyways, by the way, if you didn't like the joke, no problem. Just hit the dislike button twice. So white played g4, and now you could prepare this move, or you can even play b5 straight away as a gambit, because then, if white accepts it, it allows you to bring the rook into play and to again develop this queenside attack even quicker. So let's say if the knight goes back, you can play like this, and already you're threatening checkmate, and it's tough for white. So say if they try something like this, you can play queen b5. Again, it doesn't matter, it's not about specific moves, you're just trying to attack his king, open up the position there, and attack. Alright? If white tries to defend it, then you can sacrifice his rating and happily finish it off. So far we haven't talked about the fourth thing, which is common tactics. Obviously, if you know common tactical ideas of the opening, it's much easier for you to spot them in real games. So what are common tactical ideas for black in the French defense? We touched some of them. For instance, the move queen to b6 is a very often idea that potentially can double attack these two pawns. So it's one of the ideas worth knowing. It works out pretty often. The other one is just in general the idea that these central pawns are a little bit shaky, they're closer to you, and therefore you're going to attack them. So you initially attack this pawn on d4 because it's the easiest target, but sometimes you can also play f6 and put pressure to this other pawn on e5 as well, and then the center can potentially even fall apart. Just to illustrate the idea, it's not a theoretical variation, but just to illustrate what I mean, I'll just play some random moves. Now, after these trades, if you eliminate a couple pawns, then this pawn on e5 can actually fall and you're going to win it. Now again, it's not an opening variation, I'm just illustrating this common attacking pattern. Another common problem of white in these positions is a weakness of his king, and in particular this diagonal. Since he moved the f pawn forward, this made this diagonal weak and his king also a little bit exposed. We already know that if he trades on c5, for instance, after that he can't castle because your bishop controls the squared, exactly because the f pawn moved forward and exposed this diagonal. Also, if white castles, especially kingside, down the line, it also will enable new opportunities. Now let me show you what I mean. So let's say white decides to castle kingside, but then all of a sudden after this trade on d4, you've got bishop c5, pitting the queen and the king and winning the game. And although it looks like a sudden tactical opportunity at first, in reality, it is a very common tactical idea because his position is weakened by moving this pawn forward, and therefore this diagonal is, generally speaking, weak. Not this one, but this one. I remember back in the day when I was a teenager, my coach actually made me write a text summary following these 4 items. And we didn't have ChatGPT back then, so I had to write it myself, but that was quite useful, because an opening that previously seemed very complex and intricate all of a sudden became much clearer and even obvious to some extent on how you should play. Right, so let's recap real quick. So first off, what is your plan? Your plan here in the French defense is to attack his advanced pawn chain, primarily this pawn on d4, because it is not defended enough. Alright, maybe in the long run this one as well, by playing f6. Now, second question, what are the best squares for your pieces? So for the bishop, if he's kind enough to trade on c5, you can develop it there. If not, bishop e7, you don't have a choice here. Castling kingside is going to be the way. Your queen very often will jump to b6 in order to attack across these two directions. How about this light square bishop? Well, there is no easy way to develop it, and indeed it's one of your major problems. In the long run, you'd wish to have it right here, somehow either by pushing b6 and developing it this way, or maybe by rerouting it this way. Of course, right now the situation is cluttered with knights and whatnot, but in the long run, it might become possible. All right, the third thing is favorable trades. And in the French defense, you wish to trade off light square bishops. Whether it's your bishop or your opponent's bishop, doesn't matter. If it's your bishop, you want to trade it off just because it's a bad piece, it's inactive, it's kind of stuck right here. If it's your opponent's bishop, then it can get really active right here, especially after you castle kingside, and therefore you want to trade off this dangerous piece. So in general, we wish to trade off these light square bishops. Now, finally, the fourth item is favorable tactics, or common tactics, I should rather say. Now, again, it quite closely relates to your plan. So you wish to put pressure right here, and since you're already doing that, potentially queen b6 with this double attack is one of those common tactical ideas. The other thing still is like kind of similar to this pressure. So sometimes you can bring the bishop out here to c5 and attack across this diagonal, especially if he castles kingside. And finally, in general, since his center is advanced and stretched out a little bit too much, attacking it might make it shaky and you might be able to win one of these pawns. Also, let me know if you enjoyed this video, if you want it to be a series, and if so, let me know in the comments below which opening you wish me to cover next. And finally, if you want to have the all-round roadmap for your chess improvement, I've got a course, Level Up Your Chess, which covers everything, opening, middle game, end game, so that you have this simple roadmap to follow to bring yourself to the next level. I literally get messages and emails almost every single day with people telling me how much it helped them, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be helpful for you as well. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon.